The morning sun cast long shadows across the military compound in Afghanistan as Sarah Martinez adjusted her medical equipment one final time. As the lead veterinarian for the elite Navy SEAL K-9 unit, she had seen countless missions and treated dozens of military working dogs. But something felt different about today's assignment. Captain Jake Morrison approached her with his usual confident stride, but Sarah noticed the tension in his shoulders. Behind him walked Rex, a massive German shepherd whose dark eyes seemed to hold secrets. Rex was legendary among the SEAL teams, a dog whose nose had saved more lives than most soldiers could count in their entire careers. "Doc, we need Rex checked out before we move," Morrison said, his voice carrying the weight of command. "Intel suggests we're walking into something big today. Chemical weapons may be worse." Sarah nodded and began her examination. Rex stood perfectly still, his training evident in every controlled breath. But as her hands moved across his muscular frame, she felt something unusual. His heart rate was elevated, and there was a strange tremor in his left front leg that she had never noticed before. "How long has he been showing signs of stress?" Sarah asked, pulling out her stethoscope. Morrison frowned. "Stress? Rex doesn't get stressed. He's been through explosions, firefights, and chemical attacks. Nothing phases him." But Sarah's trained eye caught what the captain missed. Rex's pupils were slightly dilated, and his breathing patterns suggested something beyond normal pre-mission alertness. She had studied military working dogs for over a decade, and every instinct told her that Rex was trying to communicate something important. The mission briefing had been classified above Sarah's clearance level, but she knew the basics. The team was heading to a remote village where intelligence suggested a high-value target was hiding. Rex would lead the way, his exceptional nose guiding them through potential minefields and detecting explosive devices that could kill an entire squad in seconds. As Sarah completed her examination, Rex suddenly turned toward the compound's eastern wall. His ears perked up, and a low growl rumbled in his chest. Morrison followed the dog's gaze but saw nothing except empty desert stretching toward the mountains. "What's got his attention?" Sarah asked, still holding Rex's leash. "Probably just locals moving livestock," Morrison replied, but his hand instinctively moved toward his sidearm. "Rex sometimes picks up scents from miles away." Sarah wasn't convinced. In her experience, Rex only showed this level of alertness when danger was immediate and real. She watched as the dog's nostrils flared, processing information that human senses couldn't detect. 20 minutes later, the SEAL team assembled near the compound's main gate. 6 elite soldiers, each carrying enough firepower to level a small building, waited for their final instructions. Rex sat at Morrison's side, his attention still focused on something beyond the walls. Lieutenant Sarah Chen, the team's communications specialist, checked her equipment one last time. "All systems green, Captain. We have full satellite coverage for the next 8 hours." Sergeant Mike Rodriguez, the team's explosive expert, patted Rex's head affectionately. "You ready for another walk in the park, boy?" Rex's response was unusual. Instead of his typical eager tail wag, he remained statue, still, his dark eyes scanning the horizon with an intensity that made Sarah's stomach tighten with worry. The village they were targeting lay 15 miles northeast of the compound, nestled in a valley between 2 steep ridges. Intelligence suggested that Hakeem al-Rashid, a bomb maker responsible for dozens of American casualties, was hiding there with enough explosive material to level half of Kabul. As the team prepared to depart, Sarah made an impulsive decision. "Captain, I'd like to accompany the team for the first few miles. Rex seems agitated about something, and I want to make sure he's functioning at peak performance." Morrison considered her request. Having the unit's veterinarian along wasn't standard protocol, but Rex was too valuable to risk if something was wrong. "Fine, Doc, but you turn back at the first checkpoint, no arguments." Sarah nodded, grabbing her medical bag and a radio. She had no intention of entering a combat zone, but her concern for Rex overrode standard procedures. The convoy of 3 armored vehicles left the compound at exactly 800 hours. Rex rode in the lead vehicle with Morrison and Sarah, his massive head pointed out the window, nostrils working constantly. The landscape rolled by in shades of brown and tan, broken only by occasional patches of scrub grass and the distant outline of mud brick buildings. 10 miles from the compound, Rex suddenly became agitated. He whined and pawed at the window, his entire body trembling with urgency. Morrison ordered the convoy to stop, and within seconds, Rex was out of the vehicle, nose to the ground, following a scent trail that led away from the road. "What's he tracking?" Rodriguez asked, shouldering his rifle and scanning the empty landscape. Morrison trusted his dog's instincts completely. In 3 years of partnership, Rex had never been wrong about hidden dangers. "Chen, get me a satellite feed of our current position. Rodriguez, sweep for IEDs. Something's got Rex spooked." Sarah watched as Rex moved in a tight circle, his behavior becoming increasingly frantic. She had seen military dogs react to explosives, drugs, and even chemical weapons, but this was different. Rex was displaying signs of what she could only describe as panic, an emotion she had never seen in the highly trained animal. The satellite feed showed nothing unusual. No heat signatures, no evidence of recent human activity, no buried objects that might indicate explosive devices. But Rex continued his agitated behavior, occasionally stopping to look back at the soldiers with what Sarah could only interpret as urgency. "Captain," Sarah said quietly, "I think Rex is trying to warn us about something specific. His behavior pattern suggests immediate danger, but not from explosives or chemicals. This looks more like fear." Morrison had worked with military dogs long enough to respect their instincts, even when human technology couldn't explain their behavior. What kind of danger makes a sealed dog afraid? Before Sarah could answer, Rex's agitation reached a crescendo. He ran towards Sarah, barking frantically, his usual controlled demeanor completely abandoned. The sound was unlike anything she had heard from him before, sharp, desperate, almost human in its urgency. The team immediately took defensive positions, weapons drawn, scanning for threats that remained invisible to human senses. But Rex ignored the soldiers entirely, focusing all his attention on Sarah. He circled her repeatedly, occasionally stopping to bark directly at her face, his dark eyes filled with an intelligence that seemed almost supernatural. "He's trying to tell us something," Sarah said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Something about me." Morrison's radio crackled to life. "Alpha Team, this is base. We're showing unusual seismic activity in your area. Recommend immediate return to compound." But Rex's behavior suggested that returning to base might already be too late for whatever he was trying to prevent. Sarah knelt beside the frantically barking dog, placing her hands on his massive head, trying to understand the message that could save lives or cost them everything. The truth was hidden in Rex's desperate eyes, but decoding it would require Sarah to trust an animal's instincts over human logic, military protocol, and her own medical training. As she looked into those intelligent brown eyes, she realized that everything she thought she knew about this mission was about to change forever. Rex's barking grew more intense, and Sarah felt a chill that had nothing to do with the desert wind. Whatever the dog was trying to tell her, time was running out to understand it. Sarah's hands trembled as she held Rex's massive head, staring into eyes that seemed to hold desperate urgency. The German shepherd's barking had evolved into something that sounded almost like pleading, a sound that raised goosebumps along her arms despite the desert heat. "Doc, what's wrong with him?" Morrison demanded, his rifle trained on the empty horizon while his team maintained defensive positions around their vehicles. Sarah's veterinary training kicked in as she tried to analyze Rex's behavior systematically. His pupils were now fully dilated, his heart rate was through the roof, and his entire body was focused on her with laser-like intensity. But this wasn't illness or injury, this was communication. "He's not sick," she said slowly. "He's trying to save my life." The words hung in the desert air like a death sentence. Morrison lowered his weapon slightly, studying his dog with new understanding. In 3 years of partnership, he had learned to read Rex's signals like a second language, but this level of desperation was unprecedented. Rodriguez approached cautiously, his explosive detection equipment sweeping the ground around Sarah. "No buried devices, Captain. Whatever's got Rex worked up, it's not bombs." Chen's radio crackled with static before clearing. "Alpha Team, satellite shows a convoy of vehicles approaching from the southeast. 3 trucks moving fast toward your position. ETA 15 minutes. Morrison's tactical mind immediately processed the threat. They were exposed, with limited cover, and now potentially trapped between unknown hostiles and whatever danger Rex had detected. But his dog's continued focus on Sarah suggested the real threat was something else entirely. Sarah stood slowly and Rex's barking intensified. He began circling her again, occasionally jumping up to place his massive paws on her chest. Each time she tried to move toward the vehicles, he blocked her path. When she stepped toward the road, he became frantic. When she moved toward the rocky outcropping 50 meters away, Rex calmed slightly. He wants me to go that way, Sarah realized. Away from the vehicles, away from the road. Morrison's combat instincts warred with his trust in his partner. Every tactical manual said to maintain mobility, stick to defensible positions, and never abandon vehicles in hostile territory. But Rex had saved his life 17 times in the past 3 years, and the dog had never been wrong about danger. The sound of approaching engines grew louder. Morrison made his decision. Chen Rodriguez, get the vehicles to that ridge and set up overwatch. I'm staying with Rex and the doc. Captain, that's not, Rodriguez began. That's an order, Sergeant. Rex is trying to tell us something, and until I know what it is, we follow his lead. Sarah watched as 2 of the 3 vehicles moved to higher ground, leaving her alone with Morrison and Rex near the road. The approaching convoy was now visible as dust clouds on the horizon, and Rex's agitation reached new heights. Suddenly, Rex did something completely unexpected. He grabbed Sarah's medical bag in his teeth and began dragging it toward the rocky outcropping. When she followed, he dropped the bag and ran back to grab her sleeve, pulling her further from the road. My equipment, Sarah said, understanding dawning in her voice. He's trying to get me away from my equipment. Morrison's eyes narrowed. What's in that bag, Doc? Sarah's mind raced through the contents of her medical kit. Standard veterinary supplies, antibiotics, surgical instruments, anesthetics. And then she remembered the special addition she had made that morning. Oh my God, she whispered, her face going pale. The experimental treatment. Morrison grabbed her arm. What experimental treatment? Dr. Peterson at the base hospital asked me to field test a new medication for combat stress in working dogs. It's a prototype, completely untested. I brought a sample to evaluate Rex if he showed signs of anxiety during the mission. Rex's desperate barking suddenly made perfect sense. The dog wasn't warning her about external danger. He was warning her about the danger she carried with her. What kind of prototype? Morrison demanded. Sarah's hands shook as she reached for her radio. It's a synthetic compound designed to enhance a dog's sensory abilities while reducing stress responses, but if the formula is unstable. She didn't need to finish. Morrison understood immediately. An unstable chemical compound in the middle of a combat zone, with unknown side effects and no antidote, could kill not just Rex but potentially everyone in the immediate area. The approaching convoy was now close enough to identify 3 unmarked pickup trucks carrying armed men. Morrison's Overwatch team reported hostile weapons, but no clear identification of the occupants. Doc, how unstable are we talking? Morrison asked, pulling Sarah behind a boulder as the first shots rang out from the approaching vehicles. I don't know, Sarah shouted over the gunfire. The compound was developed in a lab. It's never been tested in field conditions, especially not in extreme heat. Rex continued his frantic behavior, but now Morrison understood. The dog's enhanced senses could detect chemical changes that human noses couldn't perceive. The medication in Sarah's bag was breaking down in the desert heat, potentially creating toxic fumes or worse. Chen's voice crackled over the radio. Captain, we've got at least 12 hostiles dismounting from those vehicles. They're spreading out to flank your position. Morrison realized their situation had gone from bad to catastrophic. They were pinned down by hostile forces, carrying potentially deadly chemicals, and his most valuable asset, Rex, was too agitated to function effectively. Rodriguez, can you get a clean shot on those vehicles? Morrison radioed. Negative, Captain. Too much ground clutter, and they're using the terrain for cover. Sarah watched in horror as Rex's behavior became even more desperate. The dog was now pawing at her medical bag, trying to bury it in the sandy soil. White foam appeared around his mouth, not from exertion, but from proximity to whatever chemical reaction was occurring in her equipment. The bag is leaking, Sarah realized with growing terror. Whatever's happening to that compound, it's affecting Rex directly. Morrison made a decision that went against every tactical principle he had learned in 15 years of military service. Chen, Rodriguez, fall back to secondary positions. Do not approach our location under any circumstances. Captain, we can provide cover. Negative, there's a chemical hazard down here. Maintain distance and call for hazmat support. But even as he gave the order, Morrison knew that help would arrive too late. The hostile forces were closing in, Rex was showing signs of chemical exposure, and Sarah's experimental medication was turning into a weapon that could kill them all. Rex's barking had changed again. Now it carried a note of pain that made Sarah's heart break. The dog was suffering, but he was still trying to protect her, still trying to lead her away from the danger she had unknowingly brought into the field. "We have to get that bag away from him," Sarah said, tears streaming down her face. "Whatever's in there is poisoning him." Morrison grabbed her medical bag and hurled it as far as he could toward the advancing enemy. It landed in the sand 30 meters away, and Rex immediately calmed slightly, though white foam continued to drip from his mouth. The hostile forces were now close enough for Morrison to hear their voices, Arabic, mixed with what sounded like Russian. Professional soldiers, not local insurgents. Whatever they wanted, it wasn't random. "Captain," Chen's voice was urgent over the radio. "Those aren't Taliban. Equipment and tactics suggest foreign military, possibly Russian special forces." The pieces of a larger puzzle began forming in Morrison's mind. The experimental medication, the precise timing of the hostile forces, Rex's desperate warnings. This wasn't a coincidence. Sarah's prototype medication wasn't just experimental, it was the target. Rex's barking had saved their lives, but now Morrison realized they were caught in something much larger than a simple combat patrol gone wrong. Someone wanted that medication badly enough to send professional soldiers into hostile territory to retrieve it. And now those soldiers were less than 50 meters away, with Rex poisoned, Sarah defenseless, and Morrison's team too far away to provide effective support. The truth Rex had tried to warn them about was finally becoming clear, but understanding it might have come too late to save any of them. Morrison pressed himself against the boulder, his mind racing as the hostile forces closed in. Rex lay beside him, breathing heavily but no longer foaming at the mouth since the medical bag had been thrown away. Sarah knelt beside the dog, checking his pulse with trembling fingers. "His heart rate is stabilizing," she whispered, "but we need to get him medical attention soon." The sound of boots on sand grew closer. Morrison counted at least 8 different sets of footsteps approaching from multiple directions. Professional soldiers who knew how to move quietly in desert terrain, definitely not local insurgents. Chen's voice crackled over the radio, barely audible. "Captain, we've identified the hostiles. Russian Wagner Group, same unit that hit the research facility in Syria last month." Morrison's blood ran cold. The Wagner Group was Russia's elite mercenary force, used for operations too sensitive for regular military. If they were here, it meant Sarah's experimental medication was worth far more than anyone had realized. Rex suddenly lifted his head, his ears perked toward something Morrison couldn't hear. The dog's nostrils flared, and despite his weakened condition, he began a low, controlled growl that Morrison recognized as his warning signal for immediate danger. A Russian voice called out in accented English. "American soldiers, we know you are behind the rocks. We have no interest in killing you. Give us the medication and you can leave safely." Morrison exchanged glances with Sarah. How did they know about the medication? This level of intelligence suggested someone at the base had leaked information about the experimental compound. "We also know the German Shepherd is dying from exposure to your chemical weapon," the Russian continued. "Surrender the medication, and we will provide antidote for your animal." Sarah's eyes widened. "They have an antidote, how is that possible unless—" The horrible truth hit them simultaneously. The experimental medication wasn't experimental at all. It was a Russian chemical weapon, and Dr. Peterson had somehow obtained a sample. Sarah had been unknowingly carrying biological weapons into the field. Rex's condition suddenly made complete sense. The dog's enhanced senses had detected familiar chemicals, compounds he had been trained to identify as threats. He hadn't been trying to warn Sarah about unknown danger. He had been trying to warn her that she was carrying the enemy's weapons. "Dr. Peterson," Morrison said grimly. He's been feeding intelligence to the Russians. Sarah felt sick. The medication he gave me, if it's really a chemical weapon, then Rex's exposure. We'll kill him within hours without treatment, the Russian voice called out, apparently having overheard their conversation. Your government's antidotes will not work, only we have the correct formula. Morrison's radio crackled with Chen's urgent voice. Captain, we've got bigger problems. Satellite shows 3 more enemy convoys approaching from different directions, at least 40 hostiles total, ETA 10 minutes. The tactical situation was hopeless. Morrison's team was outnumbered 8-1, trapped in the open with limited ammunition and no air support available for another hour. Worse, Rex was dying from exposure to chemicals that only the enemy could neutralize. But Rex had one more warning to give. Despite his weakened condition, the dog struggled to his feet and walked slowly toward Morrison's discarded equipment pack. With his teeth, he pulled out Morrison's satellite phone and dragged it toward Sarah. He wants us to make a call, Sarah realized. Morrison understood immediately. Rex wasn't just a detection dog, he was trained in emergency communications. During their missions, Rex had been taught to retrieve communication equipment if his handler was injured or incapacitated. Sarah grabbed the satellite phone and quickly dialed the emergency number for their base commander, Colonel Williams. The call connected immediately. Sarah, what's your situation? Williams' voice was tense. Colonel, we're trapped by Russian Wagner Group forces who want Dr. Peterson's experimental medication. But, sir, I think that medication is actually a Russian chemical weapon. Rex has been poisoned by exposure to it. There was a long pause before Williams responded. Sarah, Dr. Peterson was arrested 2 hours ago by military intelligence. We discovered he's been passing information to Russian contacts for over 6 months. The medication he gave you is indeed a weaponized compound. Sir, the Russians say they have an antidote for Rex. They're lying, Sarah. We developed the antidote here at the base using Peterson's stolen research. Help is already en route to your position. The sound of approaching helicopters suddenly filled the air. Morrison looked up to see 2 Apache attack helicopters and a Black Hawk medical evacuation chopper approaching from the south. The Russian forces immediately opened fire, but their small arms were useless against armored aircraft. Within minutes, the Wagner Group soldiers were either dead or retreating toward their vehicles. As the medical evacuation team landed, Sarah cradled Rex's massive head in her lap. The dog's breathing was shallow, but his dark eyes remained alert and focused on her face. You knew, didn't you? She whispered to him. You knew that medication was dangerous from the moment you smelled it. Rex's tail managed one weak wag as the flight medic approached with a syringe containing the real antidote. This should counteract the chemical exposure, the medic said, injecting the medication into Rex's leg. But he'll need intensive care for the next 48 hours. Morrison knelt beside his partner, stroking the dog's head gently. You did good, boy. You saved all of us. As they loaded Rex into the medical helicopter, Sarah reflected on how close they had come to disaster. If Rex hadn't detected the chemical weapon, if he hadn't warned them about the danger, the Russian forces would have succeeded in retrieving their stolen weapon. But Rex had done more than detect danger. He had exposed an entire spy network operating within their base. Dr. Peterson's arrest would lead to the discovery of other compromised personnel and prevent future attacks. 3 weeks later, Rex had made a full recovery and was back on active duty with Morrison's team. Sarah had been reassigned to a new position, overseeing military working dog health across the entire region. The official report listed the incident as a successful counterintelligence operation, but Sarah knew the truth. Rex hadn't just been doing his job as a detection dog. He had been protecting his pack, using intelligence and determination that went far beyond his training. During their next mission briefing, Sarah watched Rex carefully as Morrison reviewed their equipment. The dog remained calm and alert, showing none of the agitation that had saved their lives in the desert. How does he do it? Sarah asked Morrison after the briefing. How does he know the difference between safe chemicals and dangerous ones? Morrison smiled and scratched Rex behind the ears. Dogs can smell things we can't even imagine, but Rex is special. It's not just his nose, it's his heart. He doesn't just detect danger, he protects the people he loves. Rex looked up at both of them with those intelligent dark eyes, and Sarah could swear she saw understanding in them. The dog knew exactly what he had accomplished. He had saved lives, exposed traitors, and prevented enemy forces from acquiring dangerous weapons. But most importantly, he had demonstrated something that military manuals couldn't teach and technology couldn't replicate. Sometimes the most sophisticated early warning system is a dog who loves his family enough to risk everything to protect them. As they prepared for their next mission, Sarah made sure her medical kit contained only verified, safe medications. But she also made sure that Rex was always close by, knowing that his instincts were worth more than all the technology in the world. The truth Rex had tried to communicate in those desperate moments in the desert was simple but profound. Loyalty, intelligence, and love are the most powerful weapons against betrayal and danger. And sometimes, a dog's bark in the right moment can save more lives than all the guns and bombs in the world. Rex had not just detected a chemical weapon, he had exposed how vulnerable trust could be and how powerful it was when placed in the right hands or paws. In the end, it wasn't sophisticated intelligence gathering or advanced technology that had saved them. It was a German shepherd who loved his family enough to never stop trying to protect them, even when the threat came from within their own ranks. The soldiers learned that day that the most dangerous enemies aren't always the ones you can see coming. Sometimes they're the ones standing beside you, wearing the same uniform and speaking with trusted voices. But they also learned that the most reliable allies are often the ones who can't speak at all, yet somehow always find a way to communicate exactly what needs to be said. Rex's desperate barking in the desert hadn't just been a warning about immediate chemical danger. It had been a message about trust, betrayal, and the kind of loyalty that transcends species and saves lives. The soldiers understood too late that Rex had been trying to tell them something profound, that true security doesn't come from weapons or walls, but from knowing who you can trust when everything else falls apart.